My name is Lena Vasquez. I am 29 years old. And the worst thing my mother ever did to me happened on a Tuesday in March. On the same afternoon, she looked me in the eye and called me the most selfish person she had ever raised. I want to tell you that I saw it coming. I want to say there were signs I chose to ignore, patterns I should have named sooner, a trail of small wrongnesses I could have followed to the truth years before I did. There were, actually. All of those things existed. But you do not always have the language for what is happening inside a family. You just know it feels off, and you spend years, sometimes a decade, sometimes longer, convincing yourself that off is the baseline. That off is normal. That the discomfort is yours to manage, and not theirs to explain. I grew up in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest, the older of two daughters, in a house where love was always conditional and approval was always one behavior away. My mother, Renata, was charming to everyone who did not live with her. Neighbors adored her. She organized the church fundraiser every spring without being asked and brought homemade soup to anyone on the block who was recovering from illness or surgery. She remembered birthdays. She sent handwritten thank you notes. She had a laugh that made strangers feel immediately welcome. Inside our house, she kept a ledger. I do not mean this metaphorically, or rather, I mean it both ways. She kept score of everything, and she was meticulous about it, and she could open that ledger at any moment, at any volume, without warning, and recite it back to you in full. Every favor she had ever extended, every sacrifice she had made in your name, every time she had gone without so that you could have something, and every time you had failed to appreciate it sufficiently. The ledger was comprehensive. The ledger was always balanced in her favor. My younger sister Brianna was her favorite. This is not a bitter thing to say. It is simply the most accurate thing I can say about the household I grew up in, and Brianna would confirm it without hesitation if you asked her, because Brianna knew it too, and had known it since she was 7 years old, and had learned to navigate it the way children learn to navigate anything they cannot change, by making peace with it and moving on. Brianna had my mother's laugh and her gift for performance, her instinct for reading a room and adjusting. I had my father's quietness and his tendency to disappear into work. My father left when I was 11. He was not a villain. He was just a man who had run out of patience and did not know how to explain that to a child, so he did not explain it at all, and I spent 4 years waiting for an explanation before I stopped waiting. My stepfather, Doug, came into our lives when I was 14. He was not cruel, which I want to say clearly because cruelty would have been something I could have named and responded to. He was simply indifferent, in the particular way that step-parents can be indifferent, present in the house, absent in every room, existing in a kind of permanent peripheral distance that was neither hostile nor warm. He agreed with Renata in that slow, nodding way of someone who has learned that disagreement costs more than silence. He was good at his job at the warehouse, and he was good at disappearing into the garage on weekends, and those were the two things I knew about him with any certainty by the time I left home. I left home at 22. Not dramatically, not in the middle of a fight, not with a suitcase thrown onto the lawn. I left because I had saved enough for a deposit on a studio apartment 12 blocks away, and because I had a job, and because I was ready to find out what my life felt like when I was the only person responsible for it. The apartment was small. The building was not new. The rent was $847 a month, which was exactly what I could afford on my salary of $34,800 a year as a junior accounts coordinator at a property management firm. I bought a small couch from a woman 3 streets over for $40. I bought dishes at the thrift store on Morrison. I set up a savings account, and by December of that first year, I had $4,200 in it, and I was quietly, privately proud of that number in the way you are proud of things you built without anyone watching. My mother noticed. She always noticed money. Before I tell you what she did with that information, tell me, what is the weather like where you are right now? Is it cold? Is it raining? I ask because when I think about that period of my life, those years between 22 and 26, I always picture gray skies and wet pavement. The streetlights in the parking lots reflecting orange on black asphalt. The particular quality of Pacific Northwest winter light, which is less light than the absence of darkness, a pale gray ceiling that sits low from October through April and makes everything feel slightly smaller than it actually is. I wonder sometimes whether that is memory accurately preserving the weather, or whether grief just looks like that when you look back at it. In October of that first year, I was 22 for months into the job. My mother called me at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night. The furnace had gone out. Doug's hours had been cut at the warehouse. Could I help with the repair bill? Just this once. She would absolutely pay me back by Christmas. The bill was $847. I transferred the money by Friday morning. She did not pay me back by Christmas. She did not pay me back the following spring either, and I did not ask because asking felt like accusing, and accusing felt like something a bad daughter would do, and I was trying very hard not to be a bad daughter. That was the beginning of the template. It was a clean template, well designed for its purpose. The request always came at night, always in a calm and slightly exhausted voice, always framed as temporary. A car repair in February for $1,240. A dental bill for Brianna in June because Brianna was between jobs and the molar could not wait, $680. A credit card payment in September that was just until the end of the month. The check is coming, I promise, $1,500. A plumber in November. A registration fee for Doug's truck in January. Small numbers spaced out. Never so large that it triggered alarm. Never so frequent that I could point to a pattern without feeling like I was being dramatic. Over the course of 3 years, from October of my first year working through the summer, I turned 25. I gave my mother approximately $14,300 in total. I kept no formal record of it. I had no spreadsheet. I did not think to keep a record because it had not yet occurred to me that I would ever need one. I thought I was helping my family. I thought this was what good daughters did. There was a specific afternoon in April of my second year. I was 23 and it was a Saturday, and I had been planning to use that weekend to finally get to the DMV to renew my registration, when my mother called at 10:22 a.m. and said the water heater had failed and there was water in the basement, and could I come? I came. I spent the afternoon helping Doug move boxes out of the water's path, while my mother sat at the kitchen table researching water heater installation costs and relaying numbers to me in an increasingly alarmed voice. The unit was old. The installation would run $1,640. She said she did not have it. She said she had $200 in her account, and the credit card was already near its limit. She looked at me in the particular way she had, not asking directly, but making the shape of the ask so obvious that declining it would have felt like cruelty. I transferred $1,400 that afternoon. She paid the difference in cash. She thanked me that day, which was not always the case. She said I was the most responsible person in the family. She said she did not know what she would do without me. I remember the quality of that feeling, the warmth of being needed, the specific satisfaction of being called responsible by someone whose approval I had been trying to earn for years. I drove home at 6:14 p.m. and made dinner, and told myself that this was what family did for each other, and that the money would come back around eventually. It did not come back around. None of it came back around. And the compliments came with the requests, reliably, and then faded between them, which was something I noticed without naming, the way you notice the temperature of a room changing without deciding to measure it. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that somewhere in those same 3 years, my mother had found a quieter, larger, more methodical way of accessing my finances. One I had not agreed to. One I did not know existed. I found out on a Tuesday in March, 29 years old, 8 weeks into a new position as senior accounts manager at a different firm. The promotion had come with a salary review and a conversation with the HR coordinator about certain company accounts I would be managing that required a lender credit check. She suggested I pull my own report first, just to have it ready, to know what was there before anyone else saw it. I told her I would do it that weekend. I did it on a Tuesday instead, because of what my mother said to me at 2:31 in the afternoon. She had called that morning and asked me to come to the house. She needed to talk to me about something, she said. She sounded tired, which was not unusual, and calm, which was also not unusual. I drove over after work. I arrived at 2:14 p.m., parked in the same spot in the driveway I had used since I was old enough to drive, and she was in the kitchen with Doug, and the atmosphere in the room was already pressured before I sat down. She wanted $4,200. She said it without preamble, which was new. Normally there was a longer approach, the The sigh, the context setting, the backstory about what had gone wrong and how temporary this was. This time she just said the number and looked at me. Doug was at the table with a mug of coffee. He appeared to be studying carefully. I told her I couldn't. I said it gently. I said I was 8 weeks into the new position, and my first full paycheck under the new structure hadn't landed yet, and I needed to be careful. I said I was sorry. I said I hoped things would stabilize soon, and that I wanted to help when I could. She looked at me for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator made its low hum. Outside, a car passed on the street. Then she said, "You've never done anything for this family. You only think of yourself." Doug did not look up from the mug. I said nothing. I sat with it. I breathed. Then I told her I needed to get home, and I stood up and I got my keys from the counter where I had set them, and I walked to my car, and I sat in the driveway at 2:51 p.m. and opened the annual credit report portal on my phone. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. Some part of me was acting on instinct more than logic, a slow accumulation of small wrongnesses finally pointing at something I did not yet have words for. I expected nothing. Or I expected some minor confusion. A store card I had forgotten to close. Something small and easily resolved. The first account loaded, and I did not recognize it. A credit card. Opened in July, 3 years prior. Balance of $11,240. The mailing address on the account was my mother's house. My name, my social security number, my date of birth, her address. I sat in the driveway for 4 minutes before I opened the second account. There were 4 accounts. I drove to the library 2 blocks from my apartment because my home printer was out of ink, and I remember the specific texture of that hour. The fluorescent light overhead, the faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner, the sound of the machine pulling each page through, as one of the most precise sensory memories of my adult life. 12 pages came out. I collected them from the tray and sat down at one of the tables near the window and read each page twice before I moved to the next one. The accounts broke down like this. The first was a retail credit card opened in July, 31 months before that Tuesday, with a current balance of $11,240. The second was a personal installment loan opened the following January for $14,800, a lender I had never heard of, a loan I had never applied for, with my social security number on the application and my mother's address as the residence. The third was a second credit card, opened in March of the year after that, balance of $8,440. The fourth was a smaller installment loan from an online lender, opened 11 months after the third account for $9,220. Total, $43,700 in debt. Opened across a window of 31 months. Every application used my social security number, which my mother had obtained years earlier when she helped me file my first federal tax return at 18, and which I had never thought to question whether she retained. Every application listed her home address as mine, which was accurate at the time of the first opening and not accurate after, but a detail that would not have triggered a flag in the verification process. The pattern, once I could see the whole thing laid out across 12 pages, was not random. The first account opened 4 months after I began my first job, 4 months after she learned I had income and a credit file worth using. The loan openings correlated with gaps in her request to me directly, as though she had been managing 2 parallel streams of access to my finances and adjusting the flow between them based on what was easier or less visible at any given time. I sat at that library table for 26 minutes. I know it was 26 minutes because I checked the time when I sat down 3:47 p.m. and I checked it again when I stood up, 4:13 p.m. During those 26 minutes, I did not cry. Something inside me went completely quiet. Not numb. Quiet is different from numb. Numb is absence. Quiet is a room after a very loud sound, when the sound has stopped and the air is still processing what just happened. That is what I felt. A kind of ringing stillness. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table with the 12 pages spread in front of me, and I read every account a third time, slowly, looking specifically for any error I could have made, any way this was a coincidence or a mistake or an identity mix-up that had nothing to do with what I was thinking. There were no errors. Every number was correct. Every date was accounted for. Every application bore the identifying information that only my mother, among all the people in my life, would have possessed in full and in one place. At 5:47 p.m. I opened the FTC's Identity Theft Gov website. I spent 40 minutes reading the documentation on reporting procedures, on the difference between local and federal reporting, on the specific evidentiary value of filing at the federal level for cases involving a pattern of fraud over an extended period. I read the page about what happens when the suspected perpetrator is a family member. That page was shorter than the others, but it was there, and it had been written by someone who understood that this was not a theoretical scenario. I called the FTC Consumer Fraud Line at 6:22 p.m. The intake specialist, a woman named Patricia, had a measured and unhurried voice. She asked me to describe the accounts in order of opening date. She asked me to confirm the total across all four. She asked whether I had any documentation of the applications themselves, or whether what I had were the account records from the credit bureau report. I told her I had the bureau records. She told me that was sufficient to open a case, and that I should preserve the originals carefully. She told me that because the accounts had been opened across more than 12 months and followed what appeared to be a deliberate, staggered pattern, the case would be flagged for investigative review rather than processed as a single incident report. She gave me a case reference number at 7:09 p.m. I wrote it on the back of the 12th page, in pen in the margin next to the fourth account. My mother called at 8:33 that same evening. I did not answer. She called again at 8:51 p.m. and at 9:04 p.m. and at 9:22 p.m. and at 9:47 p.m. By 10:18 p.m., she had called 7 times and sent 3 text messages. The first asked if I had gotten home safely. The second asked why I wasn't responding. The third said simply, "Call me when you can, it's important." I read those messages for a long time, specifically the word important. I thought about what it meant that she could use that word in that register on the same evening I had filed a federal fraud report with her name on it. I did not think she knew what I had done. I thought she had moved on from the afternoon's argument and was circling back toward the ask, recalibrating the approach, trying a softer angle. I turned my phone face down on the nightstand. I went to sleep at 11:30 p.m. I slept through the night, which surprised me. But the quiet that had come in the library parking lot had not lifted, and I think sleep was part of it. Not peace, but the body's recognition that the hardest decision had already been made, and there was nothing left to resist. The following morning, I called my employer's legal referral service at 8:47 a.m. I was connected by 9:15 a.m. with an attorney named Priya Chandrasekaran, who had 12 years of experience in consumer fraud and civil identity theft cases. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. I have never been to that office. Every conversation we had was by phone or by email, and she was one of the most competent people I have ever spoken with in my life. I described the situation in order. She asked me to email the 12 pages and the FTC case reference number. I sent them at 9:41 a.m. She reviewed the documents and called me back at 3:15 p.m. She was precise in the way that good attorneys are precise. No theatrical flourishes, no false reassurance, no softening of the situation. She told me that the evidence supported a clear case of deliberate identity fraud committed over a period of 31 months. She told me the correlation between my employment start date and the first account opening date would be significant in any investigative context, as it demonstrated a trigger event. She told me that as the documented victim, I had the right to dispute all 4 accounts with all 3 credit bureaus immediately, initiating a fraud hold that would suspend collection activity on those accounts during the investigation period. She asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told her I wanted to proceed correctly. I told her I did not want to move faster than the evidence could support. I told her I did not want to do this out of anger. And I meant that because I had spent the previous 18 hours trying to locate anger inside myself and finding instead something quieter and more settled than anger. Something that had been building for a long time without my knowing it. A certainty. She filed the formal dispute letters with all 3 credit bureaus on March 19th. She submitted the supporting documentation package to the FTC case file on March 21st, including a signed declaration of the fraud timeline that I reviewed and approved on March 20th at 6:38 p.m. On March 24th, a Monday morning, she sent formal letters to all 4 creditors notifying them of the active federal fraud investigation and requesting an immediate suspension of collection and reporting activity. I did not contact my mother during any of this. I had thought about it. I had spent several evenings in those 2 weeks turning the question over, sitting with it, trying to find the version of events where I called her first, where I gave her the 12 pages and sat across from her and said, "Explain this to me." I wanted that version to exist. I tried to construct it. But every time I got to the part where I handed her the pages, I saw her face in the kitchen, the specific look she had given me before she said, "You've never done anything for this family," and I understood that there was no version of that conversation that would produce the truth. There was only a version that would give her time. She called 11 more times between March 15th and March 24th. I answered once. On March 20th at 7:15 in the evening. She asked if I was okay. She said she had been thinking about Tuesday and she felt bad, and she wanted to make things right. Her voice had the particular softness it gets when she is managing something. Not sorry, not genuinely contrite, but careful. Measuring the temperature. I told her I was fine. I told her I needed some space, and I would reach out when I was ready. She said okay. She said she loved me. I said I knew. I hung up. It took me a long time, after I hung up, to sit with the fact that I had not said it back. I noticed that I hadn't. I noticed that I had not been able to. The creditors began contacting her in early April. I do not know the exact date, because the first signal I had was a phone call from Brianna on April 7th at 6:48 in the evening, a call I nearly didn't answer. Brianna was crying. Not the dramatic kind, not the performative kind she used when she needed something from our mother or when she was building toward a favor. The real kind. Halting and irregular, with the particular quality of someone who has been holding something in for hours and has just reached the limit of what holding can contain. She said, "Mom is saying you reported her to the government. She says you're trying to destroy the family. She says you're doing this because you've always been jealous and you wanted to hurt her." I let her finish. I did not interrupt. Then I said, very quietly, "For accounts, Brianna. 31 months. $43,700. There was silence. Long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call had not dropped. Then Brianna said, in a voice I had not heard from her before, smaller, older, as though she had aged several years in the space of that silence, "I didn't know it was that much." Which told me she had known something. Some portion of it. I did not ask what or how long. Not that night. That question belonged to a later conversation that I was not yet ready to have. After we hung up, at 7:22 p.m., I sat with that phrase for a long time. I didn't know it was that much. The grammar of it. The specific thing it admitted, and the specific thing it withheld. I thought about Brianna growing up in the same house, watching the same patterns, learning the same lessons. I thought about what she had decided to do with what she had seen, and what I had decided to do with what I had seen, and how those decisions had made us different people standing in different places, and how neither of those places was entirely safe. My mother called me 22 times between April 7th and April 14th. I did not answer. Her voicemails ran long and moved through predictable stages, confusion in the first few, then justification, then something that approached the shape of an apology without ever landing in one. Each message circled back to her own difficulty. The warehouse cuts, the furnace, the dental bill, everything she had sacrificed and everything she had endured and everything she had given to me across my entire life. The full ledger opened in audio form and recited at volume in the recording. Doug left one voicemail. It was 11 seconds long. He said, "Lena, this is your father. Well, stepfather. Your mother is very upset. I hope you'll consider calling her." There was a pause, as though he had more to say, and then decided he didn't. Then he hung up. I listened to it once, and then I sat with the strangeness of it. This man who had spent 15 years agreeing with everything my mother said, who had nodded over his coffee mug while she dismantled me with 9 words, now leaving an 11-second voicemail about her feelings. I did not call him back either. In a voicemail left at 11:51 p.m. on April 11th, a Friday night, which meant she had been sitting with this for hours, she said, I was going to pay it all back. I just needed time. You, of all people, should understand needing time. I listened to that message 4 times. I was trying to understand it fully. I wanted to know if there was a version of that sentence that was true, whether she had actually believed, at the moment of each application, that she would restore what she had taken. Whether that belief, even if it never produced action, even if it was the kind of belief that exists specifically to make the person holding it feel better, was real. I came to the conclusion that it did not matter. Whether she believed it or not, she had opened 4 accounts in my name across 31 months and had not told me. Whatever she had believed, she had known I did not know. That was the choice. Attorney Chandrasekaran sent the formal civil demand letter on April 22nd. It was 4 pages, precise and clinical, and it outlined the 4 accounts. The documented 31-month timeline, the FTC case reference number, the total principal amount of $43,700, and the attorney's fees of $2,140 incurred to date. It gave my mother 30 days to respond through legal counsel. She did not respond through legal counsel. She called me instead. On April 24th at 2:17 p.m., I watched my phone ring. I let it go to voicemail. She said, "I know you're angry. I know I made mistakes. But I am still your mother. Doesn't that still count for anything?" I listened to it once. I did not save it or delete it. I set the phone face down on the counter and stood at the kitchen window for a while. Outside, the rain was coming in from the west the way it does in April here. Not hard, not dramatic, just persistent, the kind of rain that does not announce itself and does not stop. Some doors close themselves. You only have to stop holding them open. I made tea. I sat down. I did not call her back. The Credit Bureau investigations completed on May 9th. All 4 accounts were removed from my credit file. My credit score, which had been sitting at 614 under the weight of those accounts, a number that had been quietly blocking me from a car loan, from a better apartment, from options I had never known were being closed off, moved to 741 within the next billing cycle. Attorney Chandrasekaran called me at 4:33 p.m. on May 9th to confirm the removals and to tell me that the FTC investigation remained active. "These cases rarely move quickly," she said. "But the documentation is strong and the pattern is clear." I thanked her. I meant it. In June, I began the process of changing my Social Security number, which is possible under specific circumstances, including documented ongoing harm from identity theft. The process required a formal declaration submitted to the Social Security Administration with supporting documentation including the FTC case number and Attorney Chandrasekaran's letterhead. It took 11 weeks. The new number was issued in late August. I have not spoken to my mother since April 24th. I don't know what she has told people. Brianna stopped relaying those reports sometime in May, which I was grateful for because I was tired of receiving updates from a conflict I had already resolved in myself. I know the debt is being pursued by the creditors through their own collections process, separate from anything I control or participate in. I want to be honest with you about something. I still think about her. I think about her in the way you think about a house you grew up in after it has been demolished, not because you want to go back, but because the space it occupied is still there, and you notice the absence when you pass it. The longing is not what it was. The old longing was for a mother who would see me, who would add me to the ledger in a different column, who would love me without keeping score. That longing is gone now. What remains is something flatter and quieter, something like grief for the version of her I spent 29 years trying to find inside the version that actually existed. Real healing is not one apology fixing 10 years. Sometimes it is 12 printed pages and a case reference number, and the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding a financial record that someone else damaged. Sometimes healing looks nothing like forgiveness and everything like paperwork. I do not know what my mother is to me now. I am still working out the language for it. What I know is what I am to myself, a woman who found the truth late and acted on it correctly and did not collapse under the weight of it. That is not nothing. For right now, that is enough. There is something I want to share before I close this because it took me longer to find than it should have, and I do not want it to take you as long. If you have ever had the sense that your credit report might contain accounts you do not recognize, debt opened in your name, credit cards you never applied for, loans that do not match your history, You can pull your full report for free at annualcreditreport.com at any time. You are entitled to one free report from each of the 3 major bureaus every 12 months. The FTC's Identity Theft Gov website guides you through the dispute and reporting process step by step, and it is clear and well-organized and written for people who have never done this before. Attorney Chandrasekaran told me that the majority of identity theft victims wait more than 18 months before reporting, usually because they do not know they have been targeted, because the accounts are opened at a different address and the statements never arrive. Earlier reporting means earlier resolution and significantly less damage to your financial record. If something feels off, pull the report. It costs nothing. It took me 8 minutes. It changed everything. If you were in Lena's position, if you sat in your mother's driveway and opened that portal and found 4 accounts and $43,700 in debt opened in your name across 3 years, would you have filed the federal report that same evening, the way she did? Or would you have gone back inside, laid the 12 pages on the kitchen table, and given your mother the chance to explain herself first?